Why did Isaac walk out after seeing Colin's phone? Why isn't this episode as good as the other ones this season? Did Marcus Rashford really write the book that Ted's reading to Henry? We'll be looking at these questions and more in this video. Welcome to Square Eyes, a channel where we recap, review and take a sideways look at your favourite TV shows. In this video we'll be looking at episode 8 of season 3 of Ted Lasso, called We'll Never Have Paris. Let's jump straight in. The episode opens with AFC Richmond on a winning streak. It seems that the total football we saw the team experimenting with in the last episode has started to take effect, and they're blowing teams away. They beat Aston Villa, Southampton, Tottenham and Everton. We don't get to see much of it, as it's all dealt with in a quick-fire montage. Instead, the first proper scene is Ted looking miserable as he sits across from Michelle and Jake, who are dropping off Henry before they head off for a trip to Paris. After the credits, we see that things are still going strong with Keeley and Jack. As they're getting intimate with each other, we hear Keeley's phone is blowing up with messages. She takes a look and we see a horrified reaction from her, but the camera cuts away before we find out why. In the next scene, Nate is looking at his phone, but it's not about Keeley, it's about Richmond's rise up the table. Despite the fact that things are going well for him, that's not enough. He can't help but focus on his old club. He does put his phone away when Jade wakes up next to him, and this tells us that their relationship has clearly developed since we last saw them going out on their first proper date in the previous episode. Things are obviously at a fairly early stage of their relationship with Nate and Jade though, as Nate woke up early so he could go next door to use his neighbour's bathroom to shower and weep because he was too nervous to use his own bathroom within earshot of Jade. He also initiates a nervous discussion with Jade about whether their relationship has progressed to a point where they could be boyfriend and girlfriend. Jade seems a lot more at ease with the uncertainty and leaves it unresolved. Then we find out that Keeley's horror was because a private sex tape has made it onto the internet, after a massive leak has led to numerous celebrities' personal pictures and videos becoming public. Keeley is overwhelmed by the news, but Jack helps her settle down and reassures her that she'll help her fix it. At the training ground, Ted assembles the Diamond Dogs, with Trent Crimm as its newest member. He wants to talk about Michelle's engagement to Dr. Jake, which Ted assumes is going to happen because they're going to Paris. The other Diamond Dogs point out to Ted that it hasn't happened yet, and it's not worth worrying about things that haven't yet happened. Over at West Ham, Nate tries to set up his own equivalent of the Diamond Dogs with his staff, but it doesn't go to plan. Rupert doesn't come to the meeting, and the two other guys that do turn up offer Nate pretty terrible advice about his relationship with Jade. He wants to know whether he should push Jade to give their relationship a label or not. Disco, Nate's assistant coach, has been divorced 3 times, which doesn't mean his advice will be bad by default, but as it happens, his advice is actually bad. But not as bad as the guy in the suit, who suggests a tip from the manosphere, a pick-up artist technique called negging, where you're mean to a girl to make them like you. Nate quickly sees that his Diamond Dogs equivalent was a terrible idea and calls the meeting to a close. Honestly though, the group was doomed to fail when you decided to call them the Love Hounds and not the Hounds of Love, missing an obvious Kate Bush reference. More importantly though, Nate hasn't built a culture of respect and mutual trust where a group like the Diamond Dogs could work, so it obviously would fall on its face. His staff thought he was about to sack them before the meeting started, so why on earth would they want to open up about their emotions? While Nate may be getting results at West Ham, this scene shows that his lack of people skills and emotional awareness means he'll struggle to sustain his success because he's not built the right culture at the club. Ted then goes to see Rebecca in her office to ask her to arrange a private investigator to follow Michelle and Jake. She tries to talk him out of it, but he's adamantly wants to know what they're up to, so it seems like she agrees to his request. Over at Keeley's PR company, Barbara gives Keeley a statement that Jack has sent her. It's a grovelling apology, and makes it sound like Keeley was the one that did something wrong, despite the fact that she was the victim of the hack and was entirely innocent. Barbara clearly looks uncomfortable in handing the statement to Keeley, most likely because she knows Jack is making her do her dirty work for her. In the changing room, the players discuss the leaked photos, and the tone suddenly changes from a sitcom to a public service broadcast. While it's impossible to disagree with the underlying message of the scene, which is to delete sensitive pictures of people when you're no longer in a relationship with them, the whole thing feels a bit odd. The discussion feels too forced and artificial, like you can hear the writer's voice too clearly and not the characters enough. But the upshot of the scene is that the players all agree to take their phones and delete any naked pictures that they've got from former relationships. This presents a problem for Colin, as his former partners are men and he's still in the closet. To avoid anyone seeing his pictures, he goes out into the corridor, but Isaac follows him out there because he thinks he's trying to avoid deleting his pictures. When Isaac confronts Colin about deleting his pictures, he snatches his phone and takes a look, which reveals to him that Colin's former partners are men. He takes a look at Colin and then storms out of the training ground without saying anything. Colin is left to contemplate the implications of this moment, and it's not clear how his captain has taken the news of finding out. Keeley goes to see Rebecca to talk about the sex tape being released. She talks about how supportive Jack has been, but also how the statement she gave her was far from the reassuring tone that she initially struck with her. Rebecca takes a look and tells Keeley that the statement has obviously been written by a lawyer and she shouldn't read it if she doesn't want to. As she's leaving the training ground, Roy expresses his condolences to Keeley, which is a nice and caring thing for him to do, but then he ruins it by asking her who she made the sex tape for. Roy knows straight away that it was the wrong thing to ask, but it's too late after he's asked the question, and Keeley walks away upset and he's left to curse himself for being so insensitive and putting his own jealousy before Keeley's feelings. Keeley's in the next scene too, as she's back at home when Jack comes in and she tells her that she won't read the legalese statement that's been prepared for her. Then we see Ted reading Henry a bedtime story and putting him to bed. As they're chatting, Ted can't help but ask questions about Jake's involvement in Henry's life. Luckily for Ted, Henry falls asleep while he's asking these questions, so he doesn't have to hear the answers. A bit like Roy when he's asking Keeley about who the video is for, Teddy's just torturing himself with these questions. He doesn't need to know the answers to them. The next morning, Keeley is dressed up for the polo event that Jack invited her to, but Jack then tells her that she's cancelled it because of the sex tape leak. She says it's because she thought Keeley wouldn't want to go, but it might have been more because she didn't want to be seen with Keeley. Instead, they decide to get dressed up and do something else. Ted, Beard and Henry have the day off from football to enjoy themselves, and they ask Henry what he wants to do, and all he wants to do is watch a football game. West Ham are the only team playing in London that day, which is a little bit implausible given the dozens of London football teams. Beard says he needs to change before they go to the game, and we find out that's because he wants to put on his full AFC Richmond tracksuit. At the game, Nate is perturbed to see Ted, Beard and Henry in the stands. Henry's delighted to be there, completely unaware of the bad blood between Nate and the rest of the Richmond team. Beard looks miserable, but Ted seems relatively happy to be spotting his old friend, despite everything that's happened between them. I have a feeling that deep down Ted wants Nate to do well, in spite of what happened with him at the end of last season with the leaked story about the panic attacks. Keeley and Jack have gone to play miniature golf rather than watch a polo match, which a cynical part of me thinks is a far less expensive location to film from a production point of view, but it is also away from the glare of the press too. Even though they're trying to get away from public scrutiny, they still bump into an old uni friend of Jack who's there on a hen do. Jack introduces Keeley as a friend rather than her girlfriend, which suggests he's embarrassed of her after the sex tape was leaked, or perhaps he's planning on distancing herself from her. Keeley picks up on this straight away, but pretends she hasn't noticed. Rupert sends Nate a message to apologise for Ted getting in to watch their game and says it won't happen again. Nate's first reply is to say that it didn't matter, but he deletes it and instead replies thank you, sending back what Rupert wants to hear rather than what he actually thinks. Outside the Crown and Anchor, Beard gives Henry a pep talk about being a child with divorced parents, telling him a story about why Hey Jude was written. It's a great piece of uncle work by Beard, giving Henry a kind adult to offer him support and guidance. Beard doesn't say very much, but when he does it's always worth listening to. Meanwhile, Ted is talking to Rebecca about Michelle and Jake's trip to Paris. She has information from the private investigator, but instead of passing it on, she manages to convince him that it's not important and instead he should focus on relationships that matter to him now, the most important one being the one he has with his son. So he hangs up and goes over to joining a sing-along with Beard and Henry. Keeley and Jack talk over the statement. Jack's managed to get a toned-down wording produced, but Keeley still doesn't want to release it. Then we find out what's really going on, when Jack explains that it's not a good look when the woman running a company she funds has a porno online. This reveals that Jack's ashamed of Keeley, and clearly disapproves of her previous behaviour, despite the fact the video is intended to be kept private, and even if it wasn't, she hadn't done anything wrong. Jack walks out on Keeley, and when Keeley asks if she's coming back, she says she doesn't know. It seems like their relationship is most likely over now. At Nate's apartment, he's obsessing over the media coverage of Ted's attendance at his game, rather than enjoying the positive result. Jade tries to pull him out of it and tells him to enjoy his victories. She also casually drops into the conversation that he's her boyfriend. This pulls Nate out of his slump and cheers him right up. Another person looking sorry for themselves is Keeley. Then Jamie turns up on her doorstep to check in on her. He's also called around to apologise because he's the source of the leak. His password for his email was password, so it's not a huge surprise that he was hacked. His remorse is genuine, and after he refused to apologise for his bad behaviour when he was going out with Keeley in Season 1, it shows how much he's grown. Ted says goodbye to Henry when Michelle comes to pick him up. Ted deliberately keeps hold of Henry's bag when he passes it to her, to see if she's got a new engagement ring on, but her finger is bare. Then there are a few interesting interactions as they leave for the airport. Firstly, Jake tries to fist bump Henry as he goes to the taxi, but gets completely blanked. Then Michelle looks back at Ted's apartment with what looks like a lingering look. I think it's deliberately hard to read, and it looks like Ted is a bit confused by it too. Then the credits roll, and it's the end of the episode. I've got to say that this was my least favourite episode of the season so far, possibly of the whole series, but that's not saying a great deal, as I tend to like every episode of Ted Lasso to some degree or another. I just found this one didn't connect with me as much as the others. Some people might like it, and that's great, but it felt like an episode without having to trudge through the story a bit, and apart from a few high points, it didn't quite land in the same way as most Ted Lasso episodes do. Things I like about Ted Lasso are the funny jokes, the emotional and moving scenes with characters that they've carefully developed, clever references to pop culture, using football to tell stories that are relevant to our lives. I felt like this episode didn't do enough of those things, or when they tried to do them they didn't quite come off. It was funny in places, emotional in others, but not to the same extent as the best episodes. I really liked the scene where Beard gave Henry a little pep talk, and also seeing Nate try and fail to set up his own Diamond Dogs group at West Ham was good, but I felt the main storylines in this episode fell a bit flat. Keeley's sex tape leaking was a sad story and an attempt by the show to take on a current and very relevant social issue. However, I felt like some scenes swerved too much into public service broadcasting, and it felt like they were trying too hard to teach the audience something and forgot about the story. The message was important, and it's great that they're trying to communicate the importance of not hanging on to sensitive pictures of other people that you shouldn't have, but they could have done all that in a much more subtle way. I felt like I was pulled out of the story for those scenes where the team debated whether they should delete pictures or not. Before this season, I'd always felt like Keeley was a bit underserved by the storylines in the show. She tended to be the one supporting the other cast members with their issues rather than getting her own stories to pursue, so her branching out and starting her own business sounded like a substantial and interesting direction to take the story. In practice, the scenes with KJPR have tended to be a bit hard work at times, with Keeley so often struggling to cope and being out of her depth, which hasn't been that much fun to watch, and a previously feisty character who was decisive and sassy has too often seemed helpless and lost. In this episode we saw Jack reveal her true colours to Keeley, with her drafting a statement for Keeley that effectively blamed her for the video that was leaked, despite the fact that she was the victim. She then also distanced herself from their relationship with her uni friend at the golf course, after cancelling their attendance at the polo match, so it's clear she was pulling back from Keeley even before she walked out after their argument. I hope, for Keeley's sake, that their relationship is now over and we can move on from that part of this season's story. Another storyline in this episode which felt a bit flat was Ted struggling to cope with Michelle going to Paris with Dr. Jake. When he became fixated on the idea of them getting engaged, the Diamond Dogs told him not to worry about something that hadn't happened yet, but it was Rebecca that gave him the best advice when she told him to let go of it entirely and focus on moving forward with relationships that were still going on. The fact that Ted pulled out a green matchbook and some magnets earlier in the episode is likely to get the Ted and Rebecca relationship fantasists excited, but given that the writers know about this large and slightly wacky part of the Ted Lasso fandom, I think they might be trolling them with Easter eggs like this. I could be wrong and we'll see Ted and Rebecca get together in the next 4 episodes, but I still get the impression that they're just good friends, and I think I might prefer their relationship to stay that way. Staying with Ted's love life, there was that lingering look from Michelle at the end of the episode. Couple that with a finger that didn't have an engagement ring on it, and you could think there's a possibility that she might have feelings for Ted still. We saw Jake look quite goofy at times in this episode, gunning for pictures in front of telephone boxes, getting blanked by Henry and being weird about washing his hands. It was also pretty clear that Michelle hadn't had a great time in Paris with him. These are tiny moments, but are they there to show us that Michelle is becoming more aware that he's not perfect? One thing I really like is Ted insisting on calling him doctor and not being able to get used to dropping it. As much as this might seem like an innocent habit, he's also, in a subtle way, reminding Michelle's new partner that he broke his professional ethics by dating a patient every time he uses his full medical title. It wouldn't stun me if Ted was aware of what he's doing there, and is intentionally bringing up the fact that he's a doctor as often as possible, just to provide a little reminder of how he betrayed his code of ethics. One of the big moments in this episode came when Isaac discovered the pictures on Colin's phone, and now most likely knows that Colin is gay. His reaction to what he saw didn't seem all that positive, as he walked straight off without saying anything. Earlier on in the season we saw Isaac make an offhand comment in the changing room that was slightly homophobic, so it's possible that he might not cope well with Colin being gay. I find that hard to cope with though, as we're meant to like Isaac, and if he's horrible to Colin because of his sexuality, then there's not much coming back from that. My hope is that Isaac's negative reaction may be because he's disappointed that a teammate would keep such a huge part of their personality secret from the rest of the team, because they were scared of the reaction, because he's offended that Colin thinks his teammates won't support him. That seems more likely than Isaac being a homophobe, but we'll have to wait and see. Colin's reaction to the sex tape conversation became his undoing in the end. To mask his true sexuality, he plays an exaggerated version of a heterosexual in the changing room. So things he was saying about keeping hold of pictures weren't his actual opinion, but the opinion of a fake persona that he hides behind. Only he went too far with it and made Isaac suspicious, and made him think that he wasn't joining in with the mass deletion of pictures. My favourite line in this episode came from Rebecca when she said, "The Eiffel Tower was just a lamppost with a publicist." I'd wholeheartedly agree with this assessment. I've been to visit it before, and it's an impressive piece of engineering, but it's really not romantic. I saw 3 rats running around outside, got pestered by people trying to sell overpriced roses to anyone in a couple. My wife didn't get a rose, by the way. And you couldn't move for tourists. Paris is a lovely city, but don't expect the Eiffel Tower to be a highlight of your trip if you do go. The episode is called We'll Never Have Paris, which is a reference to the famous line from the movie Casablanca, "We'll always have Paris." It's pretty tragic that Ted and Michelle never made their trip to Paris, so Ted was left having to stew on this thought while she was there with her new partner. It served as a reminder that it's better not to wait to do things that you really want to do. The huge release of celebrities' private photos and videos that happened in this episode echoes a real-life incident in 2014 that was named The Fappening, which included celebrities such as Kirsten Dunst and Jennifer Lawrence among the victims of the leak. I'm a little bit surprised that this was a storyline on an Apple TV show, as the real-life events being referenced here occurred as a result of a phishing scam where celebrities' Apple iCloud accounts were exploited because users clicked on trick emails. I'd have thought that Apple wouldn't have been keen to have a show on their streaming platform making reference to such an embarrassing incident from their past, even if the Ted Lasso equivalent was done through email rather than iCloud. Ted is reading Henry, The Breakfast Club Adventures, The Beast Beyond the Fence by Marcus Rashford. While the Man United player's name features most prominently on the cover, it's also written by the more recognised children authors, Alex Falese-Koya, so I doubt Marcus was late for training because he'd stayed up late bashing away at his keyboard. More likely he talked over some ideas and his co-author went away and did the hard work. The outfit that Keeley wore to miniature golf of a hat, gloves and polka dot dress is a reference to Pretty Woman, where Julia Roberts' character wears a very similar outfit to go to a polo match with Richard Gere. Beard talks about how Hey Jude was written by one of the Beatles for the other one's divorced child. He's referring to how Paul McCartney wrote Hey Jude for Julian Lennon, following the divorce of his father and mother, when John Lennon left his wife after starting seeing Yoko Ono. Paul composed the song in the car while he was driving down to see Julian and his mother Cynthia after the split. The song was originally going to be called Hey Jules, but he changed the name to Jude because he liked the sound more. The busker singing Hey Jude is a Danish singer-songwriter called Alice Vargas. He's had a long and interesting career in music, including co-writing Bulgaria's 2017 Eurovision Song Contest entry, which came second in the competition, Bulgaria's best ever result. I talked about it briefly earlier, but when the man in the suit in Nate's office mentions that if you like a woman you should insult her, he's most likely referencing a technique called negging, and the book he says he read was probably The Game by Neil Strauss. While the book claims to be about penetrating the secret society of pickup artists, it's actually really about teaching men how to take advantage of women. It's really grim. There are now just 4 episodes left in the season, and potentially the whole of Ted Lasso as a series. It feels like things are now set up nicely for the final run of episodes, and I'm hopeful that we'll see the major storylines from this season brought to a satisfying conclusion. That means that now Keeley is seemingly split up with Jack. It opens up the possibility of her reconciling with Roy, though his thoughtless question about her video didn't help him this episode, and Jamie's offer of support may have proved to Keeley how much he's changed. There's also Ted's personal life that seems to be moving along. If I was going to make a prediction, I suspect that Michelle may leave Dr. Jake before the end of the season, try to get back with Ted, but he will reject her because he's moved on now. That would show real growth from him and open up the possibility of him forming a new meaningful relationship with someone else, rather than being a mess, as Sassy described him a few episodes ago. I think Colin is going to have to come out of the closet sooner or later, as Isaac knows his secret and didn't seem to respond positively to the news either, so we're most likely going to find out exactly how he feels about it in the next episode. Was it homophobia that we saw from Isaac, or was it just a friend being upset about another friend keeping a secret from him? Nate's story is chugging along slowly too. His relationship is going well with Jade, and he's a success as a Premier League manager at West Ham, but he seems obsessed with AFC Richmond and Ted despite the fact that his life's going well. Jade seems to be bringing out a better side of Nate, but I'm not sure I like the idea that Nate's problems all get fixed by the love of a good woman, so I hope that future episodes give him the opportunity to confront some of his past behaviour and give him the chance to make amends. At least the football side of things seems to have picked up. After Higgins floated the idea of sacking Ted earlier in the season, they're now playing attractive attacking football and have won 4 games in a row. Jamie Tartt has become a key player for the team thanks to Roy's training, and it seems set for them to rise up the table and to compete with West Ham for glory. But things never seem to go that easily for AFC Richmond, so we can expect some complications along the way. This has been my recap and review for episode 8 of season 3 of Ted Lasso. I've recently done some research on the people who watch my videos. People who subscribe to the channel are more like the Diamond Dogs at AFC Richmond, articulate, emotionally aware, and empathetic to those around them. Those that watch the videos and don't subscribe, I'm afraid to say, are like the Love Hounds at West Ham. They struggle to understand their feelings and take relationship advice from bad books. So please be like the Diamond Dogs and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.